Joining me now is the co-host of the Christopher and Rajay Show, Christopher Glenon.
Thank you very much for having me, Tom.
Hey, thanks for joining me. So, the Biden administration has been very transparent about the fact that climate change is one of their biggest initiatives. So I just want to ask you, what's our understanding of so-called climate change, and are human beings actually a contributing factor to, let's say, shifting in the weather?
So I think that climate change, we have a lot of things happening there. Some of it is the Biden administration overstepping their bounds in some respect. Do I think that humans play some kind of role in the environment? Absolutely. Do I think we're causing climate change? I think that's a very questionable thing because we've transitioned from a story of global cooling to global warming, and now they call it climate change. So they continue to shift the message, and that's over the course of the last century that they've been doing that. So do we play a role? Yeah, I mean, I have an environmental footprint that I leave. You have one. Businesses have one. I mean, you have businesses every day like Chevron and Chevron and other oil companies like Exxon that are leaving oil in the Amazon or in other parts of the world that we have to be concerned about. So we absolutely impact the environment. But what kind of impact do we really have on the climate? And that's something I think polarizes our nation it polarizes our nation, both with conservatives on one side of the issue and liberals on the other. And so with the Biden administration, they continue to play that so they can continue to drive off of that fear. We've seen Democrats over the course of time, like AOC, who's put out this report that, oh, the world's going to end in 10 years. Al Gore before her did his thing back in 2007. And then in the 70s and the 80s, you had global cooling in the 70s, global warming in the 80s. So we continue to see this apocalyptic kind of message that continues to get put out by them. And I think that there's a happy medium that can be achieved if we change the way we position it, change the wording that we use to describe it. The climate change, Democrats will leverage that to make it sound like conservatives don't care about the environment at all. And I would disagree with that wholeheartedly. I care about the environment. I want to keep things clean. It's kind of like when you go to somebody else's house. You clean up after yourself. The same thing when you're here. An environmental footprint that we leave. And so just clean up after yourself. And that's what we're looking for the businesses, for the corporations and things like that. So we want some level of accountability.
Yeah. I think we can all agree that dumping oil or chemicals into the water is a bad thing, i.e. East Palestine, Ohio. I wanted to bring things a little bit closer to home for a second here. California is one of the most green-hungry sort of states. They pretty much neutered their fossil fuel production. They have the highest electric vehicle ownership, and yet last year we watched the bomb cyclone storms ravage the California coast. So somebody like myself would be a little bit frustrated with the fact that they're not prepared for other weather incidents. So do you have another state, let's say, who has an approach that you find to be more effective?
I think, I look at it around the nation, and I think we have different approaches. When you have the conservative states, they're like, hey, we're going to continue to allow people to have freedom of choice. I really think that that's what we need to work toward, because a lot of people are like, well, we need to get away from fossil fuels. But the reality is we have so many different energy needs that we need a combination of energy sources. So we still need the electric cars. We still need the gas-powered cars. We need the people that are going to use the solar-powered stuff. We need all of that combined because we have so much energy demand that if we don't have multiple sources to draw from, we're going to find ourselves in a shortage one way or another. And if you look at, let's say everybody in California had a Tesla. Nobody had anything else other than an electric vehicle. We have power grid outages all the time. Do you mean to tell me people aren't going to be able to go to work for weeks just because they have to wait their cycle to charge their car? Or you have people that are wanting to drive to Vegas. Well, in an electric vehicle, you have to stop about halfway there and wait for about 30 minutes. A gas-powered vehicle is a little more practical for a drive like that because I like to stop, get gas, and keep going. Mm-hmm. I don't want to stop halfway. When you're going to a destination, you want to get there and enjoy time with your family, your friends, and the events that are there. So I think there's a happy medium to be achieved, and it's understanding that we need all of those power sources together.
Yeah, and I think it's a good thing that you mentioned that conservatives are often labeled as not only climate deniers, but that we don't care about our local environment. And I think that conservatives paid way much more attention to the disaster in East Palestine than liberals. But I don't want to make this a partisan thing. What's something that, let's say, a climate skeptic like myself could just do to improve the local ecosystem around where I live?
Well, I know that I work for a company, and basically we have little programs that our employees can engage in. Some of those are things like planting trees, cleaning up. I know that in your own house, you can do the simple things like dividing out the recycles for the recycle bins. I find it a little interesting when I live in an apartment complex or in a building where they don't have the availability of a recycling bin, because that's something simple. That's something I can do on a small level, and we can all kind of chip in from that level. So it's looking at our environmental footprint again at the end of the day, and how can we mitigate that? How can we minimize what we leave behind? So we do have to think about the next generation. I mean, I have a son. I want to make sure that his generation is still able to enjoy things that, Flint, Michigan, for instance, the waterways that were polluted and all the problems they had there. I don't want my son having to experience that with the water system, even in San Diego, where sometimes we have to worry about water shortages. Mm-hmm. So we definitely have things in our environment that we need to be cognizant of and be aware of and be conscious of. So.
Yeah, and I like that that's a message of personal responsibility as opposed to giving that decision-making power over to the government. But Christopher Glenon, thank you so much for joining me on One American News.
Thank you very much for having me, Tom.